Welcome everybody to the Columbia University Sustainability Space series of events. Today we're going to be talking about nurturing green shoots, particularly focused on directing capital into sustainable finance and sustainable investments. I'm really excited to have with us three great practitioners of sustainable finance. I'll tell you about them in a moment. We're going to be hearing from them. They are designing new infrastructure and new investment products meant to nudge capital into sustainable development, into equity, inclusion, regenerative agriculture, as well as the low carbon transition, especially focused in North and South America. They're going to describe their work, especially tell us a little bit about the challenges that they've faced, how they've overcome them, and also of great interest to the audience, the kinds of skills and resources that are necessary to get their work done. So without further ado, let me introduce the participants here, the speakers. The first speaker will be Vicky Flores. Vicky is coming from the Inter-American Development Bank. Vicky's worked at IDB for 17 years. She's in charge of the Resource Mobilization Division within the Office of Partnerships at IDB. And essentially what that group does is to make sure that all the stakeholders are working together to fund development finance, blended finance, and she has a focus on gender equity, decarbonization. Vicky and I and her team have worked on a number of projects together at the Earth Institute, including an ESG index for Latin America, work on blended finance, as well as on designing products. So Vicky, it's really great to have you here. Thank you very much for coming. Let me introduce the other speakers. We also have Alicia Hill from Enterprise Community Partners. Alicia is an investment associate in impact investing and opportunity funds at Enterprise Community Investment. She's an expert in social impact venture projects, early stage, small and medium-sized enterprise development, strategic planning, project management, everything that you need to direct finance to SMEs, and particularly CDFIs, Community Development Financial Institutions. Now, Alicia, I've known for quite a while. She graduated last year with an MPA from Columbia, and she was probably the top student in some of my classes. So thank you very much, Alicia. Welcome back. Really appreciate you coming to talk to us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And then we've got Brandon Welch. Brandon has probably the most interesting title of all our panelists. He is the director of Radical Capital at Mad Agriculture. So he's going to tell us a little bit about that position. I'm not sure whether that has to do with being a radical or with perhaps cultivating roots relating to his work, but he's definitely going to tell us about that. Now, Brandon in the past has been an expert actually in long distance backpacking, in bike touring, and crisscrossing country road trips. But I understand that he has very little time for that these days because he's just about to close a multi-million-dollar fund to invest in organic regenerative agriculture at a place called the Perennial Fund. And I met Brandon about a year ago at a conservation finance conference, and I'm very delighted to have Brandon come here and talk to us about ways to to nurture green shoots. That's literally what he does. He's going to show us his fingernails later and how dirty they are. I'm not sure if they'll show up on the camera. So welcome, Brandon. Thank you very much for being here. And Brandon is coming to us from Mountain Time, so I think it's 5 a.m. for him. Or
oh yeah, it's still dark out here. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate the great intro.
Thank you. Listen, let's see how it goes. We're going to have some discussion. I'll have some questions for the panelists, and then they'll chat a little bit. We will try to go till about 8:45, and then we'll open it up to Q&A more broadly. Let's see how many people we have at the right now. We have about 16 participants, so we're hoping to make the last 10 minutes a time for you all to meet the speakers individually. So we will have some breakout rooms for each of the speakers at the end. It might be a good way for you to actually meet them in a smaller group. If you have a particular speaker that you'd like to connect with, one thing that you can do during the talk is you can rename your profile name in Zoom to signal to us, to the events group that you want to speak to Vicky or to Alicia or to Brandon. And the way that you do that, I recently found this out myself. The way that you can do that is if you can pull up your video or your screen, you can right click on your name, which is at the bottom part of your little square. If you right click on that, one of the options will be rename. And then if you click on rename, a little dialog window will open up, which allows you to rename yourself, so from Satyajit Bose, to Crazy Guy, and then you can put, Vicky or Brandon or Alicia at the end of your name, and that way we will know that you want to be in a breakout room and want to be introduced to that person. So please do that, and Natalie's put instructions on the chat also. So without further ado, let's get started on the actual discussion. I'm going to ask Vicky her first question. So Vicky, and please, feel free to introduce yourself further as you speak, so that we learn more about your actual work. So Vicky, you manage the development of partnerships within IDB to mobilize private finance. Can you tell us a little bit about why private finance is so important for development? Tell us a little bit about the partnerships that a major multilateral development bank like IDB has to manage. How do you catalyze the different sources of funding and direct them to purposes which mean generating financial return, as well as having a beneficial impact environmentally and socially?
Thank you very much, Satya. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak with you all today. It's an honor, and I think you've done a great introduction of me and of the office I represent. We always say that you introduce us better than we do ourselves. so thank you very much for that. And just to begin with your question, in Latin America and the Caribbean the region faces major financing gaps that threatens the ability for the whole region to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And just to give you a little bit of numbers, according to the OECD, the SDG needs in the emerging economies are estimated at $3.9 trillion per year globally. And this means that, you know, annual investments are already in the region or in the emerging economies are $1.4 trillion per year, meaning that the global development community is faced with a filling gap of $2.5 trillion. And what this means for Latin America on an annual basis, it's investment needed of $650 billion per year in sectors that are critical to the SDGs. And currently what the region has in financing is about 71 billion annually, and which means that our countries have to mobilize between $8 and $9 per dollar invested. And the COVID pandemic has definitely worsened this, and we will probably see new data coming up on what the actual investments are going to be needed in order to meet the SDGs for the region, which is definitely a challenge. And then to further complicate this, you know, the region is a middle income transition region, which means that the official development assistance has been considerably reduced. The 26 borrowing member countries that the IDB has in Latin America and the Caribbean, 6 of those countries have already graduated from receiving ODA funds, which are Bahamas, Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, Chile, Uruguay, and Trinidad and Tobago. I already said that. And then, you know, as countries are seeing these improvements in socioeconomic development, more of them graduating paper, the ODA to the region continues diminishing. And then this doesn't mean that there are significant gaps still within these graduating nations. And in particular, there is the inequality continues to be a huge issue, both between countries and this is recently reflected, and we can share with you a recent study that the bank released on inequality in the region and how these inequalities within countries have worsened, especially also due to the pandemic. So the IDB's approach to financing development puts emphasis on mobilization in all actors, especially the private sector, as you said. And in these settings, the multi-sector partnerships are essential, and multilateral development banks like the IDB are ideal conveners of the diverse actors that, you know, together we can work on filling these financial gaps. So from the IDB's perspective, we leverage what we have in terms of our close relationship with the government, a profound understanding of what the country's needs. We're a AAA rated institution, and we have a diverse portfolio of innovative finance instruments to engage private sector partners who then work through the IDB to channel their knowledge, their innovation, and their capital to the region. And all these efforts have been effective because of the IDB's Resource Mobilization Division is dedicated to fostering partnerships and mobilizing financing for the region. And some of these you could also look at some of the examples that we have that have been highlighted in a recent study that Satya, you have led from the Earth Institute at Columbia on the different examples that the IDB has led in mobilizing private finance and catalyzing private resources for development. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks, Vicky. Yeah, thanks for talking about that study. In a moment, I'll put up a link to it on the Earth Institute website. And essentially that was looking at blended finance, different case studies of blended finance in Latin America, getting different sources of financing in. Vicky, can you tell us a little bit about, you've been working on an index, you've launched an index a number of years ago, and it looks at a number of different aspects of ESG within Latin America, right? So tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, thank you. Well, so index, the bank developed a sustainable corporate sustainable index with the objective to identify those corporates that were the champions in development in Latin America. So we look beyond the index, which is the first index developed by an MDV. Actually, and let me just say that this index was developed in partnership with the Earth Institute and Columbia University, led by Dr. Bose, and the guidance that we've had from your side has been critical to the development of this methodology. And we work with S Network Global Indexes, which helps us with the calculation and data coming from Refinitiv, which was previously Thomson Reuters. And the index, what the methodology does, and what we saw as we could contribute from a development bank's perspective, is that we go beyond ESG data, and knowing the region and knowing the needs and development needs of the region, we look into development impact as a critical factor within the methodology. So the methodology looks at 4 pillars, which are 100% aligned with the SDGs, and the development pillar looks at how these global companies have an impact in development and in the communities. So basically, it's a family of indexes, and we have the top 100 index, which is been on its 5th iteration, and we also have Multi-Latinas index that with the same methodology as Index Americas, which looks specifically at companies that are born in Latin America and the Caribbean. And then we also have been developing a gender index to recognize 10 corporate leaders on gender equality. And this sub-index uses 20 criteria to assess how these companies empower women in their workplace, in the market, and in the community. So in addition to this, and as you mentioned as well, the financing to climate change and to clean energy, we have working in two different fronts regarding the reduction and dependence of fossil fuels. First, the Index Americas exclusion list, we worked on it very thoroughly to exclude and filter companies based on activities that the IDB will not engage because they're inconsistent with our commitment to addressing climate change and promoting environment and sustainability, such as thermal coal mining or coal-fired power generation, upstream oil and gas exploration, among others. And then also we have been working based on Index Americas methodology in a decarbonization index in partnership with the Mexican Stock Exchange. And the index has the same attributes as Index Americas, as I said, but providing an additional angle that measures and encourages efforts to reduce the impacts of carbon dioxide and greenhouse emissions. So the environmental specifically and the development pillars that comprise Index Americas highlight decarbonization efforts of companies in all sectors. The index favors companies that proactively foster low carbon economy through technological innovation, renewable energy, and energy efficiency. And we're currently working with the different actors in Mexico to design an ETF to track the performance of the index that will provide, convenient, transparent, and low-cost methods for replicating low carbon portfolio exposure.
Okay, so that's great, Vicky. Let's talk about indexes, and you're talking about making an ETF designed to that index. So this is a good place to jump to talk to Alicia. Alicia, you're structuring and launching an index of CDFIs, Community Development Financial Institutions, and I guess the aim is to channel investment into CDFIs. So tell us a little bit about that work.
Yeah, absolutely. Just for a bit of context for those that don't know, the organization I work for, Enterprise Community Partners, has been a leader in the community development space for quite a long time, since 1982. And over the course of that time has been really anchored by capital solutions and also by programmatic solutions as well, which includes some policy work. It includes some community partnerships and boots on the ground work through programs. But really, part of our organization is that we do also have a CDFI. So we have a certified community development financial institution, which is an intermediary that typically functions in servicing communities that have otherwise been underserved or historically marginalized traditional banking systems. So the idea behind this index concept that we're working on in partnership with the Rockefeller Foundation and also Next Street and Eris, which is a CDFI data insights provider and expert. The idea behind it is that traditionally CDFIs really leverage flexible capital, they leverage patient capital, and being able to, in aggregate, increase the amount of that's available for them to do their work in communities is very beneficial. So, the structure in which we typically work, a lot of CDFIs are structured as nonprofit loan funds. They oftentimes focus on very high impact priority areas in communities like affordable housing, small business lending, economic development, sometimes very targeted efforts using social impact bonds or focusing on food deserts. So all in all, it really does require a type of capital that can be leveraged in unique ways. There is oftentimes blended finance strategies leveraging PRI capital from foundation partners, potentially also leveraging institutional investment capital, but very much, much in the way that Vicky spoke about, really targeting towards inclusion and closing some of the gaps in access to capital and inequity within communities across the country, and primarily servicing communities that have demographics that typically are not being served. So we do serve a lot of low-income communities, a lot of communities of color, a lot of rural communities. And part of that effort has been enabled because there is a level of expertise and underwriting that allows us to be in the business of taking and managing risk in a thoughtful way. And so when it comes to the index itself, part of what we want to do with the index is to provide a benchmark index that really captures the stories of CDFIs and their successful financial performance over the last 30 years. And there just really isn't that type of tool available to really help raise awareness around the work that's been done and that's ongoing, and really provide data that really demonstrates that performance. A lot of the feedback through this process that we've been going through has been really not only having discussions with our own internal industry colleagues and partners, but also at financial institutions with structuring desks and hearing the appetite that is there from investors to invest in CDFIs. CDFIs have leveraged capital markets more recently in recent years, doing bond issuances and really having a great deal of success. So from an impact investor's perspective, what we're hearing and seeing is that there's demand to be able to support these types of institutions. But along with that, having the support of data that can be modeled, that can be back tested, that can really represent the performance in a thoughtful way to tell that story, but also so that you have something that you can start to track, as well as is really the goal of the index. And then essentially to use it as the basis for investable products further down the line is the aspiration.
Oh, thanks, Alicia. So, a little bit of the story you're telling me, and I'm going to bring Brandon in a second because, he may also have more to say on this. A little bit of the story you're saying is that the existing banks have a tough time lending, and so that you to these kinds of investments, and so you're turning a little bit more to capital markets, to impact investors, and that's why the index becomes so important. So because if it was just bank lending, then banks don't need indexes. They pretty much get to know their clients. But you're doing work essentially to get to advertise or to let people know about the investment opportunities in the capital markets. Would you say that's correct, Alicia?
Yeah, I would say that's correct. I would also say, a lot of our traditional partners among CDFIs as an intermediary are working with banks. They're working with more traditional financial institutions, but the ability to try to have an index to get to more retail-oriented investors who might be accessed through those channels, through a distribution network that's a part of a financial institution, is something that we have in mind, that we're thinking through. And you start to see individual CDFIs have their own note programs. Even the organization that I work for has individual retail products that can be accessed by investors who are looking to have access to invest in an organization where they can, in some cases, target their funds towards certain impact areas, or have some reassurance that it's being delivered within the communities and towards the goals that they have in mind. And I would also add, while we traditionally work with all sorts of partners, including different types of financial institutions, there is a certain level of expertise and underwriting comfort, I would say, that a CDFI that's focusing, say, on rural communities in Appalachia has the ability to really underwrite and evaluate an opportunity to deliver towards certain goals in that community. They have the partnerships, they have the understanding. So there is some level of additional intermediation that a CDFI potentially can provide, even if they are invested in by, let's say, a bank, and then relending that out to meet that need. So it is very much a coordinated effort, trying to leverage all the different parts of the financial ecosystem toward those goals. Thanks,
Alicia. Yeah, so clearly you need different players, and they all have a role to play in that financial ecosystem. So let's talk, since we're talking about ecosystems, let's talk to Brandon. And so Brandon, so in many ways, you're focused also on channeling private capital, but specifically into regenerative organic farms. Now, we hear a lot of noise these days about agriculture being a major source of emissions, cows burping and all that sort of thing. But you're focused on funding the kind of agriculture which actually preserves the ecosystem. Can you tell us a little bit about, what's regenerative agriculture? I mean, I think we've all heard of organic agriculture, but what's regenerative? What does that mean? And why do farmers that do regenerative agriculture, why would they have a difficult time raising capital? Tell us about the perennial fund.
Good questions. There's still yet to be an industry decision as to what exactly is regenerative agriculture. It's more or less a set of kind of first principles that you can manage your farm system with. So to me, that might be a little different than to some other people. To me, that's, working with nature and not against it. So using the natural cycles of the earth to, build your soil, improve your water infiltration, cycle your nutrients, be able to hedge against, weather risk, and to have more consistent yields. It's not necessarily always, adopt these three practices and you are regenerative. It's more of a systems approach where you have to look holistically at how you're handling the farming system. So, regenerative organic agriculture is combining these regenerative principles of working with nature, not against it, with organic ag, which is, chemical-free agriculture, GMO-free. There's a whole list of different synthetics and kind of these external inputs that lots of growers use that are outlined in the USDA organic certification. So we're working with farmers who are both regenerative and organic. So they're practicing organic, USDA organic management, and then also building their soils. So that likely means that, they're cover cropping. They might have tree plantings along their waterways. They have long-term biodiversity built into their cropping rotations. They're planting perennials where possible versus annuals. They're minimizing tillage. There's a whole suite of practices that, end up culminating, and together they end up being, creating a sum that's greater than their individual parts. So in the US, many farmers have a tough time transitioning to more regenerative or organic, specifically because of just the system that they're stuck in. You have these big input companies, whether it, we can villainize some if we want. I'll leave them unnamed for now. And then we have all of these major off-takers, and they can't control, the price of their inputs and the price of their outputs, or their off-takes. So when you have a bank that is going to, lend to a farmer and say, hey, I'm going to give you, $100,000 at the beginning of the year. I need this $100,000 plus 5% interest back at the end of the season after they harvest their crop and have cash flow back into their farm. They don't have much room for error there. And if they want to try something new, like cover cropping or trying to minimize tillage, if they end up missing their, yields by 10, 15%, they're in the red, and now the farm's in jeopardy, and now they can't pay their bills, and it creates this whole vicious downward cycle. So what we've done is really try to take a longer term view to the banking cycle. Right now, the banking cycle in ag largely operates on an annual modality. It's, operating capital out at the beginning of the year, so farmers can fund their production cost. So they can buy their seeds, they can pay for labor, they can pay for diesel. If something goes wrong with equipment, they'll be able to service that. And then at the end of the season, when they harvest their crop in September or October into November, then they have, cash injection, and they usually pay the bank back. We're just taking a longer term view where we understand that during that transition to organic, which takes 3 years as a USDA mandate, plus the transition off of synthetics and kind of that chemical input, like drug line that they're dependent on, there's usually a little bit of a rocky start there for 1 or 2 years. And farmers have a yield drag of, 10, 20, 30%, depending on what their baseline was. And at the same time, they're still getting conventional prices. So that's enough to put them under many times. And that's why a lot of farmers aren't able to transition. So we essentially saddle up with them for the longer term. We say, this is an investment into the farm. We're going to help you effectively transition to regenerative organic. And we give farmers all of the resources that we can along the way. So that's, farm and business planning. That's help with their crop marketing. That's, just getting it on the farm and having an ear to be able to just listen to their story. A lot of these organic farmers are in the middle of just kind of a conventional chemical landscape. They're an oasis, and they're this like lighthouse that's just surrounded by nothing else like them. So we try to really build community as well between these farmers that could be, 100 miles from the next organic farmer, regenerative organic farmer. So that's key to our strategy to help building community. So, what the perennial fund actually is, and when we take that longer term view, is, it's operating capital that helps farmers through the organic transition. And the kind of interesting piece about it is that it's a revenue-based financing mechanism. So it's a loan that takes a long-term skin in the game approach to help them transition. Once they hit certified organic and they can, manage their farm a little more effectively because they have more experience, they've now built up their soils, and they can get the organic premium, they're generally anywhere from 2 to 4 times as profitable as they were before the transition. So now all of a sudden they have all this cash coming in. They can then service the remainder of the loan for the next, we target a 5-year payback period to hit a 1.5x repayment cap. So over the life of the loan, let's say we were to give a farmer $100 an acre for 3 years, $300 total, they would owe $450 from year 0 to year 8 total. So that ends up being about a 6 to 7% effective interest rate. Except we try to minimize the downside, because since it's based on their gross revenues, If they have a year that they're unprofitable because they get hit with some sort of an externality that they couldn't control, like a tornado or a drought, we have deferral years, so they can just simply apply, say, I'm having a tough time here, the market dropped out, or we got hit with a hailstorm. Can we have a little buffer? So we actually build into each loan, into our models, 2 buffer years, just to account for total non-payment. So that's 20% of the loan, since it's a total of a 10-year note. So that's kind of the gist of regen organic ag, why farmers are having a tough time accessing capital, and then what we've done to actually formulate a structure around that we think is a win-win for everybody. We have investors really excited about it. We have tons of farmers. We're talking with 80 farmers, 28,000 acres that are going to transition, and just the brands and kind of off-takers at large. Everybody's really excited to dive into this and help these farmers transition to regenerative organic.
Thanks, Brandon. That sounds very interesting. So, in a sense, you've constructed a product, an investment product that allows a broad range of participants to directly send capital to these farmers, generate a return, which sounds very solid in the context of essentially zero interest rates, and provides rebuild soil quality, organic, and helps the community. So, the three of you are working in very similar zones, perhaps a little bit geographically dispersed, but I've heard all of you mention things like patient capital, flexible capital, long-term capital, catalytic capital. So let me ask, I'll put a question to all three of you and then have each of you respond. What are the obstacles that you face in doing your work? And particularly if you could tell us a little bit about the kind of skills gap you have. I mean, there's obviously a capital gap, but I'm guessing there's also a sort of skills gap, maybe a people gap. What do you need in order to get this done? So Vicky, I'll come back to you. Why don't you tell us, and then Alicia, and then Brandon.
Thank you so much. So in terms of Latin America, let me just speak of the region first, bottlenecks and obstacles, and let me just give you a few of them. So in emerging markets in general, and in the Latin American and Caribbean region in particular, there is a very limited pipeline of transparent, well-prepared, and well-structured infrastructure projects. And then as the number of bankable projects in these countries is low, they do not make up significant enough asset class to compel institutional investors to invest the resources necessary to analyze possible investment opportunities. And this is definitely a huge challenge. The other one that the region faces is that investments in infrastructure don't match the risk-return profile of investors. And then a solution that we see is to encourage investors to focus only on investment-grade countries, which this is also a challenge because in our region, only 6 of them are investment-grade: Mexico, Chile, Peru, Colombia, Uruguay, and Panama. So it's a challenge trying to mobilize capital to countries with large gaps that are not investment grade. And then in addition, the lack of the developed secondary market and clear monetization paths to provide liquidity on top of the huge restrictive pension funds regulatory regimes are, this is definitely hindering pension funds from investing in infrastructure assets. And then the region also faces a limitation in terms of local currency financing, as international private investors often lack the ability to find in local currency. This is from specifically from the region's perspective, and then I would say that going to your other point of what are the skills that are needed, we see from the IGP and from our perspective as a resource mobilization division that understanding business and finance is very valuable, but also we look for understanding sustainable development. It's critical, and then mastering, not only financial skills, but also soft skills in terms of relationship building, trust building, transparency, communication. These are definitely key. We've actually recently, we have been on the third iteration of a MOOC that we developed in partnership with the Sustainable Development Solution Network. It's SDG Academy, and this course actually tackles some of these points, and developing interpersonal relationships with partners is key. Ensuring mutual understanding, working on long-term vision with partners, and finally, the creation of an institutional capacity at client focus and culture within the organization is also key. So I would
Vicky, thanks a lot. That sounds very interesting. We should get a link to that MOOC on soft skills that you mentioned for development finance, because I'm sure the participants would be interested in that. Now let me go to Alicia, because one thing, Alicia, you mentioned, that there's a certain kind of knowledge and skills that some investors would have to understand, what's the risk of investing in rural communities in Appalachia. That's not like something that they teach you in business school. So how do you develop those kinds of skills?
So I think, it's really trying to pull all the different pieces together. Obviously, the finance piece is critical there, and a lot of CDFIs focus on collateralized lending. So there's a heavy real estate component, which from a finance perspective is sort of its own animal relative to the business lenders. So I would say being flexible to really dig into those different concepts, but then also understanding that a lot of CDFIs work closely with policy tools or with capital solutions that have a policy component. So I would echo a lot of what Vicky shared. The relationship management piece is critical. Lots of longstanding partnerships that are a part of the culture amongst CDFIs working together to either syndicate larger loans or do larger transactions, or really working with the community partners, because there is that trust that the local priorities will align with the capital solutions available. And sometimes, the capital solutions can have limitations. So wanting to make sure that you're being thoughtful in that regard, I think is a really critical component. And from the challenges aspect, I would just say, with respect to something like the index concept, part of what makes CDFIs so good at what they do is that they're very unique and they're expert in bespoke transactions, which means trying to bring many different ones of varying sizes together to a conforming standard around data or around the administration of an index, or potentially when you look toward the product, they don't all need the same types of capital at the same times. They all have different revenue sources. Some may rely heavily on government contracts and grants. Others may have, the more sort of consistent income streams that come from focusing on real estate. So there's a certain distinctness and nuance to each of them that makes the conversation around what does an index look like really interesting, and it's one of the components that I wouldn't call it a challenge, but I would call it one that requires a thoughtfulness and really true industry partnership to try to think it through and think through that piece. But from the training and culture aspect, being coordinated and really sort of intentional about how you put the pieces together, it really, I think, is really critical.
So, one thing that you're telling us is that we have to recognize that difference in the investees, so that there's not a homogeneity to the needs of the different borrowers, and you have to be cognizant of that and have sort of compassion for their needs. So Brandon, I mean, on that theme, I think, you can you tell us a little bit about the difficulties and what you need to address them, because you have a similar thing. I mean, you call them organic regenerative farms, but they're all scattered. They're trying to get away from monoculture, right? So in a sense, they're trying to create this diversity of products. Presumably they're all high value added, but in different ways. So tell us a little bit about the challenge of managing that.
Yeah, we faced quite a few challenges. I mean, first time fund manager, we didn't know any farmers 3 years ago. We didn't know any investors 2 years ago. The first time this type of a concept has ever really come to bear, at least in the United States, especially in regenerative organic. So we're trying to manage to, all of that. And I think, at least speaking from my perspective, when you're starting something, there's really three things that I've seen as kind of the big ones to help address some of those challenges. One, I think you've got to be relentlessly resourceful. I mean, I've done everything from building decks to Excel models, making sales, building partnerships. I hopped in an Airstream for the month of July, and we were living out of it, touring, 37 farms. And
wait, tell us what an Airstream is, because not everybody will know.
It's a camper. Yeah, so you can, there's grills, beds, everything you need to maintain your livelihood in 19 feet. So we were living out of that. It's the old school tin, 1960 style. So it was also pretty fun to just have the ability to kind of take it back in time and also escape COVID for a little bit and have our little container to tour farms. So that's, just being resourceful and being willing to just kind of jump in and try things, I think is definitely a big asset that you have to be able to get something up and running. Also having skin in the game. I've got this quote here from Nassim Taleb, and he said, it's the silver rule. Do not expose others to a harm the near equivalent of which you are not exposing yourself. I think the respect that people get from having their name on something, where if they succeed, they have the upside, but if they fail, there's also repercussions. That's really important to us at Mad Ag, and that's why we created revenue-based financing versus some debt instrument that we are going to be paid back because it's securitized at the end of the day, but no matter what. I think that is really important and something that the financial industry as a whole is certainly lacking. And then the last piece would be that the power is actually in the projects. Being able to build pipeline, to find farmers and to be able to due diligence those and know how to underwrite is critical. People always think that people with capital and with money have the power, but they don't. It's actually the people who can develop the places where you can put the money. And that has been a major asset to us, to be able to build that, tell that story, and show, photos of, dozens of farmers of like, these are the people that we're helping. This is why they need help. This is their story. This is where they're from and where they're going and their vision for their land. And that's been really important, and something that we're certainly trying to maintain as we, raise funds and turn into capital managers. So, you got to be relentlessly resourceful. You got to have skin in the game, and you've got to know how to develop project pipeline.
That's great, Bren. That's a good a place to sort of segue into Q&A. What I want to emphasize, I've known the three of you, Brandon the least, but I've known Alicia and Vicky for a long time. And what's clear from listening to all three of you is that you have a respect for the investee, the project, the borrower, the person who's putting capital to work. And, today when we see interest rates at essentially zero, we see institutions, individuals with lots and lots of money. I think the conclusion I've come to is that the thing that's a scarce resource is actually good projects, good people, good communities. Capital is not scarce. People will write checks easily. Interest rates are very low. It's not hard to get money for good projects and good people. So I think you guys have all really emphasized that. So let's see. Do we have do we have any Q&A from the audience? I'll pause a little bit.
Hi, I have one question for everyone. So it's about the using of technology to perhaps advance your goals in sustainable finance. What do you guys think about it? And have you guys implemented any like technology to improve that?
Oh, you got muted somehow.
Yep, I'm just talking about technology and the use of it to advance your sustainable finance agendas.
It's a good question. We haven't used tech yet. We're definitely not adverse to it. You know, we see it as more of technology is not the solution, but it's a tool to kind of help augment and scale when we have a model that's, you know, ready for that. So we could see that maybe on the, you know, assistance with underwriting, due diligence process, you know, managing ESG and kind of impact goals in terms of tracking like soil and financial metrics. And then potentially as well on the farm management side, you know, we're having lots of conversations with, you know, farm mapping software and lots of like ArcGIS and, you know, satellite imagery to then augment some of our risk management as well. But we don't have that built in a robust way yet. We're mostly just kind of doing the landscape analysis and seeing where, you know, where is this going to make sense in the future.
I would just add to that, it might seem sort of like a very simplistic answer, but from a marketing standpoint, being able to really elevate the impact of the work, we actually have and it's not specific to just Enterprise's CDFI, but really for the organization. We have a group that focuses entirely on data and strategy and has a scoring system for communities where you can pull up a report. It's called Opportunity 360 that looks at 5 different nodes of community resiliency and health, including mobility, health outcomes, economic status, things of that sort, where it allows you to get sort of an indexed read as to where a community sits, and it's relying on many other different data sources. So I would say similar to what Brandon highlighted, this idea of how to evaluate your potential pipeline. And a lot of the work that we're doing is very much coming from a risk assessment perspective. And so that data and technology piece helps you understand that a bit better to make those decisions, but also just getting the messaging out and telling the story as well.
Well, we will have time for one more question, I think. And feel free to unmute yourself and ask it directly.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your participation and for this interesting chat. I have a question. Like right now, we are seeing this boom on ESG and sustainable finance all along the financial sector. My question is, how can we avoid the risk of like ESG or washing? Like everyone's talking about this, but how we prevent that it's not just like the marketing strategy, and also how we like effectively connect those projects that are really working on this to like with the finance that is moving along the field.
So I would say that in terms of you know, the how we can prevent that, this is not only marketing strategies from companies, and we have seen these you know, as a result of the COVID pandemic, that you know, in the ESG investing in social impact projects has been more than a marketing strategy, and those companies that are doing it for real, I would say, are actually continue doing it despite of the crisis and despite of the challenges that the market faces. That's from one side, and for the other side, from a development institution perspective, we keep in mind and we try to always understand how we can allocate our investments better, and who we can partner with in order to do that, and taking into consideration public data has been key for that, because we make sure that we verify not only what the companies publish, but also the real work that these companies are doing on development in the field and in communities.
Thank you, Vicky, and thank you, Maria, for a really important question. Thank you very much, Vicky, Alicia, Brandon. That was really inspiring. I think that the three of you will have a lot to talk about going forward. I wish we had more time to discuss, but I'm sure we'll continue the conversation together in future. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bose. And I'm available for any offline questions, discussions, and thank you for the opportunity. And it was a pleasure to share the panel with all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.